Hi there, welcome. You've entered your favorite, safe, quiet corner of the internet. I want you to shake the day off because the world can wait. Now please take a deep breath in with me and out. Thank you. The first story that I have for you today is The Little Prince by Saint-Exupéry. So let's get started. Once when I was 6 years old, I saw a magnificent picture in a book called True Stories from Nature about the primeval forest. It was a picture of a boa constrictor in the act of swallowing an animal. In the book, it said, boa constrictors swallow their prey whole without chewing it. After that, they are not able to move and they sleep through the 6 months that they need for digestion. I pondered deeply, then, over the adventures of the jungle. And after some work with a colored pencil, I succeeded in making my first drawing. My drawing number 1. I showed my masterpiece to the grown-ups and asked them whether the drawing frightened them. But they answered, "Frightened? Why should anyone be frightened by a hat?" My drawing was not a picture of a hat. It was a picture of a boa constrictor digesting an elephant. But since the grown-ups were not able to understand it, I made another drawing. I drew the inside of a boa constrictor so that the grown-ups could see it clearly. They always need to have things explained. The grown-ups' response this time was to advise me to lay aside my drawings of boa constrictors, whether from the inside or the outside, and devote myself instead to geography, history, arithmetic, and grammar. This is why, at the age of 6, I gave up what I might have been a magnificent career as a painter. I had been disheartened by the failure of my drawing number 1 and my drawing number 2. Grown-ups never understand anything by themselves, and it is tiresome for children to be always and forever explaining things to them. So then I chose another profession and learned to pilot airplanes. I have flown a little over all parts of the world, and it is true that geography has been very useful to me. At a glance, I can distinguish China from Arizona. If one gets lost in the night, what such knowledge is valuable. In the course of this life, I have had a great many encounters with a great many people who have been concerned with matters of consequence. I have lived a great deal among grown-ups. I have seen them intimately, close at hand, and that hasn't much improved my opinion of them. Whether I met one of them who seemed to me at all clear-sighted, I tried to experiment of showing him my drawing number 1, which I have always kept. I would try to find out, if this was a person of true understanding. But whoever it was, he or she would always say, "That's a hat." Then I would never talk to that person about boa constrictors or primeval forests or stars. I would bring myself down to his level. I would talk to him about bridge and golf and politics and neckties, and the grown-ups would be greatly pleased to have met such a sensible person. So I lived my life alone, without anyone that I could really talk to, until I had an accident with my plane in the desert of Sahara 6 years ago. Something was broken in my engine. As I had with me neither a mechanic nor any passengers, I set myself to attempt the difficult repairs all alone. It was a question of life or death for me. I had scarcely enough drink and water to last a week. The first night, then, I went to sleep on the sand, 1,000 miles from any human habitation. I was more isolated than a shipwrecked sailor on a raft in the middle of the ocean. Thus you can imagine my amazement at sunrise when I was awakened by an odd little voice. It said, "If you please draw me a sheep." What? Draw me a sheep? I jumped to my feet, completely thunderstruck. I blinked my eyes hard. I looked carefully all around me, and I saw a most extraordinary small person who stood there examining me with great seriousness. Here you may see the best portrait that later I was able to make of him. But my drawing is certainly very much less charming than its model. That, however, is not my fault. The grown-ups discouraged me in my painter's career when I was 6 years old, and I never learned to draw anything except boas from the outside and boas from the inside. Now I stared at the sudden apparition with my eyes fairly starting out of my head in astonishment. Remember, I had crashed in the desert 1,000 miles from any inhabited region, and yet my little man seemed neither to be straying uncertainly among the sands, nor to be fading from the fatigue or hunger or thirst or fear. Nothing about him gave any suggestion of a child lost in the middle of the desert, 1,000 miles from any human habitation. When at last I was able to speak, I said to him, "But what are you doing here?" And in answer, he repeated, very slowly, as if he were speaking of a matter of great consequence, "If you please, draw me a sheep." When a mystery is too overpowering, one dare not disobey. Absurd as it may seem to me, 1,000 miles from any human habitation and in danger of death, I took out of my pocket a sheet of paper and found my fountain pen. But then I remembered how my studies have been concentrated on geography, history, arithmetic, and grammar. And I told the little chap, a little crossly too, that I did not know how to draw. He answered me, "That doesn't matter, draw me a sheep." But I had never drawn a sheep, so I drew for him one of the 2 pictures I had drawn so often. It was that of the boa constrictor from the outside. I was astounded to hear the little fellow greet it with, No, I do not want an elephant inside a boa constrictor. A boa constrictor is a very dangerous creature. An elephant is very cumbersome. Where I live, everything is very small. What I need is a sheep. Draw me a sheep." So then I made a drawing. He looked at it carefully, and he said, "No, this sheep is already very sickly. Make me another." So I made another drawing. My friend smiled greatly and indulgently. You see yourself, he said, that this is not a sheep. This is a ram. It has horns. So then I did my drawing over once more. But it was rejected too, just like the others. This one is too old. I want a sheep that will live a long time. By this time, my patience was exhausted because I was in a hurry to start taking my engine apart. So I tossed off the drawing and I threw out an explanation with it. This is only his box. The sheep you asked for is inside. I was very surprised to see a light break over the face of my young judge. This is exactly the way I wanted it. Do you think that this sheep will have to have a great deal of grass? Why? Because where I live, everything is very small. There will surely be enough grass for him, I said. It's a very small sheep that I have given you. He bent his head over the drawing. Not so small that, look, he has gone to sleep. And that is how I made the acquaintance of the little prince. It took me a long time to learn where he came from, the little prince, who asked me so many questions, never seemed to hear the ones I asked him. It was from words dropped by chance that, little by little, everything was revealed to me. The first time he saw my airplane, for instance. I shall not draw my airplane. That would be much too complicated for me. He asked me, "What is that object?" "That is not an object. It flies. It's an airplane. It's my airplane." And I was proud to have him learn that I could fly. He cried out then, "What? You dropped down from the sky?" "Yes," I answered modestly. "Oh, that's funny." And the little prince broke into a lovely peal of laughter, which irritated me very much. I like my misfortunes to be taken seriously. Then he added, "So you too come from the sky. Which is your planet?" At that moment, I caught a gleam of light in the impenetrable mystery of his presence, and I demanded abruptly, "Do you come from another planet?" But he did not reply. He tossed his head gently without taking his eyes from my plane. "It is true that on that you can't have come from very far away." And he sank into a reverie, which lasted a long time. Then, taking my sheep out of his pocket, he buried himself in the contemplation of his treasure. You can imagine how my curiosity was aroused by this half-confidence about the other planets. I made a great effort, therefore, to find out more on the subject. "My little man, where do you come from? What is this 'where I live' of which you speak? Where do you want to take your sheep?" After a reflective silence, he answered, "The thing that is so good about the box you have given me is that at night he can use it as his house." "That is so, and if you are good, I will give you a string too, to tie him during the day, and a post to tie him to." The little prince seemed shocked by this offer. Tie him? What a queer idea. "But if you don't tie him," I said, "he will wander off somewhere and get lost." My friend broke into another peal of laughter. But where do you think he would go? Anywhere, straight ahead of him. Then the little prince said earnestly, That doesn't matter. Where I live, everything is so small. And, with perhaps a hint of sadness, he added, Straight ahead of him, nobody can go very far. I had thus learned a second fact of great importance. This was that the planet the little prince came from was scarcely any larger than a house. That did not really surprise me much. I knew very well that in addition to the great planets, such as the Earth, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, to which we have given names, there are also hundreds of others, some of which are so small that one has a hard time seeing them through the telescope. When an astronomer discovers one of these, he doesn't give it a name, but only a number. He might call it, for example, asteroid 325. I have serious reason to believe that the planet from which the little prince came is the asteroid known as B612. This asteroid has only been once seen through the telescope. That was by a Turkish astronomer in 1909. On making his discovery, the astronomer had presented it to the International Astronomical Congress in a great demonstration. But he was in a Turkish costume and nobody would believe what he said. Grown-ups are like that. Fortunately, however, for the reputation of asteroid B612, a Turkish dictator made a law that his subjects, under pain of death, should change to European costume. So in 1920, the astronomer gave this demonstration all over again, dressed with impressive style and elegance, and this time everybody accepted his report. If I had told you these details about the asteroid and made a note of its number for you, it is on account of the grown-ups and their ways. When you tell them that you have made a new friend, they never ask you any questions about essential matters. They never say to you, What does his voice sound like? What games does he love best? Does he collect butterflies? Instead, they demand, How old is he? How many brothers has he? How much does he weigh? How much money does his father make? Only from these figures do they think they have learned anything about him. If you were to say to the grown-ups, I saw a beautiful house made of rosy brick, with geraniums in the windows and doves on the roof, they would not be able to get any idea of that house at all. You would have to say to them, I saw a house that cost $20,000. Then they would exclaim, Oh, what a pretty house that is. Just so, you might say to them, the proof that the little prince existed is that he was charming, and that he laughed, and that he was looking for a sheep. If anybody wants a sheep, that is proof that he exists. And what good would it do to tell them that? They would shrug their shoulders and treat you like a child. But if you said to them, the planet he came from is asteroid B612, then they would be convinced and leave you in peace from their questions. They are like that. One must not hold it against them. Children should always show great forbearance toward grown-up people. But certainly, for us who understand life, figures are a matter of indifference. I should have liked to begin this story in the fashion of the fairy tales. I should have liked to say, once upon a time there was a little prince who lived on a planet that was scarcely any bigger than himself, and who had need of a sheep. To those who understand life, that would have given a much greater air of truth to my story. For I do not want anyone to read my book carelessly. I have suffered too much grief in setting down these memories. 6 years have already passed since my friend went away from me with his sheep. If I try to describe him here, it is to make sure that I shall not forget him. To forget a friend is sad. Not everyone has a friend. And if I forget him, I may become like the grown-ups who are no longer interested in anything but figures. It is for that purpose again that I have bought a box of paints and some pencils. It is hard to take up drawing again at my age. I have never made any pictures except those of the boa constrictor from the outside and the boa constrictor from the inside since I was 6. I shall certainly try to make my portraits as true to life as possible, but I am not at all sure of success. One drawing goes along all right, and another has no resemblance to its subject. I make some errors too in the little prince's height. In one place he's too tall and another too short, and I feel some doubts about the color of his costume. So I fumble along as best I can. Now good, now bad, and I hope generally fair to middling. In certain more important details I shall make mistakes also, but that is something that will not be my fault. My friend never explained anything to me. He thought perhaps that I was like himself, but I do not know how to sheep through the walls of boxes. Perhaps I'm a little like the grown-ups. I have had to grow old. The Boxcar Children. The Flight. About 7 o'clock one hot summer evening, a strange family moved into the little village of Middlesex. Nobody knew where they came from or who they were, but the neighbors soon made up their minds what they thought of the strangers, for the father was very drunk. He could hardly walk up the rickety front steps of the old tumble-down house, and his 13-year-old son had to help him. Toward 8 o'clock, a pretty, capable-looking girl of 12 came out of the house and bought a loaf of bread at the baker's. And that was all the villagers learned about the newcomers that night. "There are 4 children," said the bake shop woman to her husband the next day, "and their mother is dead. They must have some money, for the girl paid for the bread with a dollar bill." "Make them pay for everything they get," growled the baker, who was a hard man. "The father is nearly dead with drink now, and soon they will only be beggars." This happened sooner than he thought. The next day, the oldest boy and girl came to ask the bake shop woman to come over. Their father was dead. She went over willingly enough, for someone had to go. But it was clear that she did not expect to be bothered with 4 strange children, with a bakery on her hands and 2 children of her own. "Haven't you any other folks?" she asked the children. "We have a grandfather in Greenfield," spoke up the youngest child before his sister could clap her hands over his mouth. "Shh, Benny," she said anxiously. This made the bake shop woman suspicious. "What's the matter with your grandfather?" she asked. "He doesn't like us," replied the oldest boy reluctantly. "He didn't want my father to marry my mother, and if he found us, he would treat us cruelly." "Did you ever see him?" "Jess has. Once she saw him." "Well, did he treat you cruelly?" asked the woman, turning upon Jess. "Oh, he didn't see me," replied Jess. "He was just passing through where we used to live, and my father pointed him out to me." "Where did you used to live?" went on the questioner, but none of the children could be made to tell. "We'll get along all right alone, won't we, Henry?" declared Jess. "Indeed we will," said Henry. "I will stay in the house with you tonight," said the woman at last, "and tomorrow we will see what can be done." The 4 children went to bed in the kitchen and gave the visitor the only bed in the house. They knew that she did not at once go to bed, but sat by the window in the dark. Suddenly, they heard her talking to her husband through the open window. "They must go to their grandfather, that's certain," Jess heard her say. "Of course," agreed her husband. "Tomorrow we will make them tell us what his name is." Soon after that, Jess and Henry heard her snoring heavily. They sat up in the dark. "Mustn't we surely run away?" whispered Jess in Henry's ear. "Yes," whispered Henry. "Take only what we need most. We must be far off before morning, or they will catch us." Jess sat still for a moment, thinking, for every motion she made must count. "I will take both loaves of bread," she thought, "and Violet's little work bag. Henry has his knife, and all Father's money is in my pocket." She drew it out and counted it in the dark, squinting her eyes in the faint light of the moon. It amounted to nearly $4. "You'll have to carry Benny until he gets waked up," whispered Jess. "If we wake him up here, he might cry." She touched Violet as she spoke. "Shh, Violet, come. We're going to run away," she whispered. The little girl made no sound. She sat up obediently and tried to make out the dim shadow of her sister. "What shall I do?" she said, light as a breath. "Carry this," said Jess, handing her the work bag and a box of matches. Jess tiptoed over the tin box on the table, drew out the 2 loaves of bread, and slipped them into the laundry bag. She peered around the room for the last time and then dropped 2 small clean towels and a cake of soap into the bag. "All right, pick him up," she said to Henry. Henry bent over the sleeping child and lifted him carefully. Jess took the laundry bag, turned the doorknob ever so softly, opened the door ever so slowly, and they tiptoed out in a ghostly procession. Jess shut the door with as much care as she had opened it, listened to the bake shop woman's heavy snoring for a moment, and then they turned and picked their way without a sound on the country road. "She may wake up before morning, whispered Henry. "We must do our fastest walking before then. If we can only get to another town before they find out, they won't know which way to go." Jess agreed, and they all walked briskly along in the faint moonlight. "How far can you carry Benny?" asked Violet. "Oh, at least a mile," said Henry confidently, although his arms were beginning to ache. Benny was 5 years old, and he was a fat, healthy boy as well. "I think we could all walk faster if we woke him up," said Jess decidedly. "We could each take his hand and almost carry him along." Henry knelt by the roadside and set the fellow against his knee. "Come, Benny, you must wake up now and walk," said Jess coaxingly. "Go away," Benny mumbled with his eyes shut, trying to lie down again. "Let me try," Violet offered softly. "Say, Benny, you know the little cinnamon bear ran away to find a nice warm bed for the winter. Now you play your cinnamon, and Henry and Jess will help you along, and we'll find a bed." Violet's plan worked. Benny was never too cross to listen to the wonderful stories his sister Violet could tell about Cinnamon Bear. He stood up bravely and marched along, yawning, while his big brother and sister almost swung in between them. Not a soul passed on the country road. All the houses they saw were dark and still, and when the first faint streaks of morning light showed in the sky, all 4 children were almost staggering with sleep. "I must go to sleep, Henry," murmured Jess at last. Little Benny was asleep already, and Henry was carrying him again. "The first place we come to, then," panted Henry. Violet said nothing, but she kept her eyes open. Finally, she caught Henry's sleeve. "Couldn't we make that haystack do?" she asked, pointing across a newly mown field. "Indeed we could," said Henry thankfully. "What a big, enormous one it is. I was too sleepy to see it, I guess. And see how far away from the farmhouse and barn it is, too," echoed Jess. The sight gave them a new courage. They climbed over 2 stone walls, got across a brook somehow with the heavy child, and arrived at the haystack. Henry laid his brother down and stretched his aching arms, while Jess began to burrow into the haystack. Violet, after a moment of watching her, did the same. "Here's his nest," said Jess sleepily, taking her head out of the deep round hole she had made. Henry lifted the child into the opening and was pleased to see that he curled up instantly, smiling in his sleep. Jess pulled the wisps of hay over the opening so that it was absolutely invisible, and then proceeded to dig out a similar burrow for herself. "We can stay here just as long as we like, can't we, Henry?" she murmured, digging with her eyes shut. "We sure can," replied Henry. "You're an old brick, Jess. Get in and I'll pull the hay over the hole." Violet was already curled up in her nest, which was hidden so completely that Henry spoke to her to see if she was there. Then he wriggled himself backward into the haycock without stopping to hollow it out, pulled a handful of hay over his head, and laid his head on his arm. Just as he did so, he heard a heavy voice say, "Now then, lass, get along." Then he heard the rumble of a milk wagon coming down a nearby lane, and he realized, thankfully, that they had hidden themselves just before the first farmer of the neighborhood had set off toward towards Middlesex with his milk cans. He will say he didn't meet us coming this way, thought Henry, so they will hunt for us the other way, and that will give us time to cover a lot more ground. He dropped asleep just as the roosters all over the valley began to answer each other. The Railway Children by E. Nesbit. Chapter 1. The Beginning of Things. They were not railway children to begin with. I don't suppose they had ever thought about railways except as a means of getting to masculine and cooks, the pantomime, zoological gardens, and Madame Tussauds. They were just ordinary suburban children, and they lived with their father and mother in an ordinary red brick fronted villa, with colored glass in the front door, a tiled passage that was called a hall, a bathroom with hot and cold water, electric bells, French windows, and a good deal of white paint, and every modern convenience, as the house agents say. There were 3 of them. Roberta was the oldest. Of course, mothers never have favorites, but if their mother had a favorite, it might have been Roberta. Next came Peter, who wished to be an engineer when he grew up. And the youngest was Phyllis, who meant extremely well. Mother did not spend all her time in paying dull calls to dull ladies, and sitting dully at home waiting for dull ladies to pay calls to her. She was almost always there, ready to play with the children and read to them and help them to do their home lessons. Besides this, she used to write stories for them while they were at school and read them aloud after tea. And she always made up funny pieces of poetry for their birthdays and for other great occasions, such as the christening of the new kittens, or the refurnishing of the doll's house, or the time when they were getting over the mumps. These 3 lucky children always had everything they needed: pretty clothes, good fires, a lovely nursery with heaps of toys, and a Mother Goose wallpaper. They had a kind and merry nursemaid, and a dog who was called James, and who was their very own. They also had a father who was just perfect, never cross, never unjust, and always ready for a game. At least, if at any time he was not ready, he always had an excellent reason for it, and explained the reason to the children so interestingly and funnily that they felt sure he couldn't help himself. You will think that they ought to have been very happy, and so they were, but they did not know how happy till the pretty life in the Red Villa was over and done with, and they had to live a very different life indeed. The dreadful change came quite suddenly. Peter had a birthday, his 10th. Among his other presents was a model engine more perfect than you could ever have dreamed of. The other presents were full of charm, but the engine was fuller of charm than any of the others were. Its charm lasted in its full perfection for exactly 3 days. Then, owing either to Peter's inexperience or Philly's good intention, which had been rather pressing, or to some other cause, the engine suddenly went off with a bang. James was so frightened that he went out and did not come back all day. All the Noah's Ark people who were in the tender were broken to bits, but nothing else was hurt except the poor little engine and the feelings of Peter. The others said he cried over it, and of course boys of 10 do not cry, however terrible the tragedies may be which darken their lot. He said that his eyes were red because he had a cold. This turned out to be true, though Peter did not know it was when he said it. The next day he had to go to bed and stay there. Mother began to be afraid that he might be sickening for measles, when suddenly he sat up in bed and said, "I hate gruel. I hate barley water. I hate bread and milk. I want to get up and have something real to eat." "What would you like?" Mother asked. "A pigeon pie," said Peter eagerly. "A large pigeon pie, a very large one." So Mother asked the cook to make a large pigeon pie. The pie was made, and when the pie was made, it was cooked. And when it was cooked, Peter ate some of it. After that, his cold was better. Mother made a piece of poetry to amuse him while the pie was being made. It began by saying what an unfortunate but worthy boy Peter was. Then it went on. He had an engine that he loved with all his heart and soul, and if he had a wish on earth, it was to keep it whole. One day, my friends, prepare your minds. I'm coming to the worst. Quite suddenly, a screw went mad, and then the boiler burst. With gloomy face, he picked it up and took it to his mother, though even he could not suppose that she could make another. For those who perished on the line, he did not seem to care, his engine being more to him than all the people there. And now you see the reason why our Peter has been ill. He soothes his soul with pigeon pie, his gnawing grief to kill. He wraps himself in blankets warm and sleeps in bed till late, determined thus to overcome his miserable fate. And if his eyes are rather red, his cold must just excuse it. Offer him pie, you may be sure he will never refuse it. Father has been away in the country for 3 or 4 days. All Peter's hope for the curing of his afflicted engine were now fixed on his father, for father was most wonderfully clever with his fingers. He could mend all sorts of things. He had often acted as veterinary surgeon to the wooden rocking horse. Once he had saved its life when all human aid was despaired of, and the poor creature was given up for lost. And even the carpenter said he didn't see his way to do anything. And it was father who mended the doll's cradle when no one else could. With a little glue and some bits of wood and a penknife, made all the Noah's Ark beads, as strong on their pins as ever they were, if not stronger. Peter, with heroic usefulness, did not say anything about his engine till after father had had his dinner and his after-dinner cigar. The unselfishness was mother's idea, but it was Peter who carried it out and needed a good deal of patience too. At last, mother said to father, "Now, dear, if you are quite rested and quite comfy, I want to tell you about the great railway accident and ask your advice." "All right," said father, "fire away." So then Peter told the sad tale and fetched what was left of the engine. Said father, when he had looked the engine over very carefully. The children held their breaths. "Is there no hope?" said Peter in a low, unsteady voice. "Hope? Rather tons of it," said father cheerfully. But I want something besides hope. A bit of brazen say, or some solder, and a new valve. I think we'd better keep it for a rainy day. In other words, I'll give up Saturday afternoon to it, and you shall all help me. Can girls help to mend engines? Peter asked doubtfully. Of course they can. Girls are just as clever as boys, and don't you forget it. How would you like to be an engine driver, Phil? My face would always be dirty, wouldn't it? Said Phyllis, in unenthusiastic tones. I expect I should break something. I should just love it, said Roberta. Do you think I could then when I grow up, Daddy? Or even a stoker? You mean a firearm, said Daddy, pulling and twisting at the engine. Well, if you still wish it, when you're grown up, we'll see about making you a firewoman. I remember when I was a boy. Just then there was a knock at the front door. Who on earth? Said Father. An Englishman's house in his castle, of course. But I do wish they built semi-detached villas with moats and drawbridges. Ruth, she was the parlor maid and had red hair, came in and said that two gentlemen wanted to see the master. I've shown them into the library, sir, said she. I expect it's the subscription to the Vicar testimonial, said Mother, or else it's the choir holiday fund. Get rid of them quickly, dear. It does break up an evening so, and it's nearly the children's bedtime. But Father did not seem to be able to get rid of the gentleman at all quickly. I wish we had got a moat and drawbridge, said Roberta. Then when we didn't want people, we could just pull up the drawbridge and no one else could get in. I expect Father will have forgotten about when he was a boy if they stay much longer. Mother tried to make the time pass by telling them a new fairy story about a princess with green eyes. But it was difficult because they could hear the voices of Father and the gentleman in the library, and Father's voice sounded louder and different to the voice he generally used to people who came about testimonials and holiday funds. Charlotte's Web by E.B. Knight. Chapter 1. Before Breakfast. Where is Papa going with that axe? Said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. Out to the hog house, replied Mrs. Arable. Some pigs were born last night. I don't see why he needs an axe, continued Fern, who was only 8. Well, said her mother, one of the pigs is a runt. It's very small and weak, and it will never amount to anything. So your father has decided to do away with that. Do away with that? Shrieked Fern. You mean kill it? Just because it's smaller than the others? Mrs. Arable put a pitcher of cream on the table. Don't yell, Fern, she said. Your father's right. The pig would probably die anyway. Fern pushed a chair out of the way and ran outdoors. The grass was wet and the earth smelled of springtime. Fern's sneakers were sopping by the time she caught up with her father. Please don't kill it, she sobbed. It's unfair. Mr. Arable stopped walking. Fern, he said gently, you will have to learn to control yourself. Control myself, yelled Fern. This is a matter of life and death, and you talk about controlling myself. Tears ran down her cheeks, and she took hold of the axe and tried to pull it out of her father's hand. Fern, said Mr. Arable, I know more about raising a litter of pigs than you do. A weakling makes trouble. Now run along. But it's unfair, cried Fern. The pig couldn't help being born small, could it? If I had been very small at birth, would you have killed me? Mr. Arable smiled. Certainly not, he said, looking down at his daughter with love. But this is different. A little girl is one thing, a little runty pig is another. I see no difference, replied Fern, still hanging on to the axe. This is the most terrible case of injustice I ever heard of. A queer look came over John Arable's face. He seemed almost ready to cry himself. All right, he said. You go back to the house and I will bring the runt when I come in. I'll let you start it on a bottle, like a baby. Then you'll see what trouble a pig can be. When Mr. Arable returned to the house half an hour later, he carried a carton under his arm. Fern was upstairs changing her sneakers. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, and the room smelled of coffee, bacon, damp plaster, and wood smoke from the stove. Put it on the chair, said Mrs. Arable. Mr. Arable set the carton down at Fern's place. Then he walked to the sink and washed his hands and dried them on the roller towel. Fern came slowly down the stairs. Her eyes were red from crying. As she approached her chair, the carton wobbled, and there was a scratching noise. Fern looked at her father. Then she lifted the lid of the carton. There, inside, looking up at her, was the newborn pig. It was a white one. The morning light shone through its ears, turning them pink. He's yours, said Mr. Arable, saved from an untimely death, and may the good Lord forgive me for this foolishness. Fern couldn't take her eyes off the tiny pig. Oh, she whispered, oh, look at him. He's absolutely perfect. She closed the carton carefully. First she kissed her father, then she kissed her mother. Then she opened the lid again, lifted the pig out, and held it against her cheek. At this moment her brother Avery came into the room. Avery was 10. He was heavily armed, an air rifle in one hand, a wooden dagger in the other. What's that? He demanded. What's Fern got? Just got a guest for breakfast, said Mrs. Arable. Wash your hands and face, Avery. Let's see it, said Avery, setting his gun down. You call that miserable thing a pig? It's a fine specimen of a pig. It's no bigger than a white rat. Wash up and eat your breakfast, Avery, said his mother. The school bus will be along in half an hour. Can I have a pig too, Pop? Asked Avery. No, I only distribute pigs to early risers, said Mr. Arable. Fern was up at daylight trying to rid the world of injustice. As a result, she now has a pig. A small one, to be sure, but nevertheless a pig. It just shows that what can happen if a person gets out of bed promptly. Let's eat. But Fern couldn't eat until her pig had had a drink of milk. Mrs. Arable found a baby's nursing bottle and a rubber nipple. She poured warm milk into the bottle, fitted the nipple over the top, and handed it to Fern. Give him his breakfast, she said. A minute later, Fern was seated on the floor in the corner of the kitchen with her infant between her knees, teaching it to suck from the bottle. The pig, although tiny, had a good appetite and caught on quickly. The school bus honks from the road. "Run," commanded Mrs. Arable, taking the pig from Fern and slipping a donut into her hands. Avery grabbed his gun and another donut. The children ran out to the road and climbed into the bus. Fern took no notice of the others in the bus. She just sat and stared out of the window, thinking what a blissful world it was and how lucky she was to have entire charge of a pig. By the time the bus reached school, Fern had named her pet, selecting the most beautiful name she could think of. "Its name is Wilbur," she whispered to herself. She was still thinking about the pig when the teacher said, "Fern, what is the capital of Pennsylvania?" "Wilbur," replied Fern dreamily. The pupils giggled. Fern blushed. And now our time is complete. Thank you for being here. You are safe, you are calm, and you are enough. Until next time, stay hydrated and rest well.